Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers is a weekly program designed to answer all your questions, including the ones you didn't even know you had, and to clarify the endless debates around the wonderful and fascinating world of sexuality. Join us for real talk about sex from two experts in the field. Richard and Larry Siegel have over 50 years of experience as sex therapists, educators, counselors, and researchers. The Siegel Brothers are recognized around the world as trainers of medical and mental health professionals.
Hello and welcome to Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. I'm Larry Siegel, a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator.
And I'm Dr. Richard Siegel, a certified sex therapist and supervisor.
And my awesome younger brother.
Oh, thank you.
All right, cheers to you, my brother.
Cheers
Another week.
to you. Good to be with you. Thank you for
Cheers.
joining us. A lovely sake.
Indeed.
Yes.
This is a Shoun sake from Japan, specially brewed, very smooth, very nice, good chill to it. I like to present our sakes to you each week. And again, thank you for joining us. We like to say that every day should be a day for sex talk, but we appreciate you joining us on Fridays at 7 p.m.
This is our time.
Yes, indeed.
Or 7 p.m. East Coast time, wherever you happen to be watching. Thank you for joining us, and we'd be so grateful if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you came over to YouTube from Facebook, please like our Facebook page and share and help us spread the word.
Yes, indeed. And hit that thumbs up button as well.
Thank you. Yes, it's important that we get more people talking about sex in healthy ways, in important ways, not necessarily in just lewd and lascivious ways.
Right, even though that's more fun, but...
But isn't it true that that's the only time
Yeah.
Men in particular are comfortable talking about sex?
It-
if they're
it-
telling
it seems.
dirty jokes?
It seems, or bragging
Yeah.
in some way.
Yeah.
It seems that really good, effective, helpful, rational conversations around sex and sexuality just don't seem to be all of that prevalent.
Because unless you're making fun of it, you're supposed to know about it. So you can't admit you don't know about it because you look like a dork. So you got to act like you're cool and you know about it, even if you have no idea about it, until you figure it out in the dark.
And herein lies a very important aspect of so much masculinity. In fact, I think this is also part of what people often refer to when they refer to toxic masculinity. It's sort of related to that idea, right, that you just said. There's an unspoken and a spoken expectation that as men, we're supposed to know about this stuff.
Right.
We're supposed to know how this stuff works. Even when it comes to condom use, I'll never forget that first time years ago where I had a couple of guys come up to me after a class that I was doing, and we were talking about safer sex, male responsibility, and used to demonstrate how to put on a condom. And after that, there were those guys, and they were adolescents, and it was that kind of look around, make sure nobody was there, and it's like, hey, thanks for doing that. We really appreciate it because we really didn't know, and we can't say that we don't know.
Yeah.
So it's a big part of it. So I'm glad we do have this opportunity to talk a little bit as we do about sex and sexuality. And again, we invite you all to join the discussions as well.
Yeah. Any of you out there are parents, you should be having conversations with your kids on a regular basis, regardless of their age. Not one time sit down at the kitchen table for the talk when it's too little too late anyway. Most of the time.
That's right. It's an ongoing conversation throughout the lives of your children.
The teachable moments.
Yes.
And for those of you, if your parents are not, but have aging parents, we got news for you. They're sexual beings as well. And we'll be featuring that as our special topic this evening.
Indeed.
But we like to start with a little bit of sex in the news.
All right, so what do we have for a first item up here?
You want to start with this one?
Sure,
Very
let's start with that
interesting. The headline says, do porn users seek out more extreme content over time?
Now, a little background. Right?
This is the classic sex phobe argument, the slippery slope argument that porn, this started with sex addiction back in the 80s, that, it's so ubiquitous and so harmfully addictive that just your kid will be online doing their social studies homework and there'll be a pop-up with a breast on it and they'll be sucked into the computer screen and instantly addicted to porn. But then their addiction will grow because just watching vanilla porn will only get you off so long. Then you need more extreme and more bizarre and more kinky, and then you can't get off at all unless you have like XXX Asian ass Apple porn.
That's violent.
And that doesn't work anymore. And then you go out the door with a bag of candy looking for kids.
Right, exactly.
Right? Because everybody knows porn
all
addicts,
roads lead to pedophilia.
It goes right to child molesting. So I'm so glad, and even more glad that this was written for the Kinsey Institute by our colleague Justin Laymiller, who's a friend from ASECT and also proud to say on our faculty at Modern Sex Therapy Institutes. And he does a lot of research on fantasy and the role of fantasy. And this piece about porn users is really an actual, for the first time ever, a longitudinal, over time study to see whether or not that was true. And they did a study, these researchers took almost 250 high school kids, average age 16, followed them over a 6-month period, and had focused on their main interests and how that interest changed over the 6 months. So what did they find? Pornography use in general remained stable over the course of the study with a very slight trend toward more usage over time. Second, an inconsistent, by the way, they called this bias that we were just talking about, content progression thesis. That the content needs to get progressively more and more intense.
And let me just say that what you just meant, that point that when they showed that the porn use was consistent throughout the period of this study, which I believe was about 6 months, that slight increase was not in content, and it was not in the intensity of content. It was I think 1.5 minutes more time.
Well, this is even like David Lay and Nikki Prouse and the research that they've done, which shows that the average time spent looking at porn is about 5 minutes. Compared to the average time spent watching television, which is closer to 5 hours.
Or and social media, which could be days.
Nobody's going to Facebook Anonymous meetings.
That's right.
And maybe
we
should take another look at that. The second finding here is that despite that popularity of the content progression thesis, reported preferences of these kids in the study actually decreased. The reported preferences for extreme content decreased over the 6 months, and I think that owes to that adage: something's only kinky the first time.
That's right.
Right? Because after you've done it once,
it's not kinky anymore.
It's certainly a lot less kinky than the first time. So they some specific data: 8.1% of kids in the study reported a preference for violent or coercive porn at the beginning of the study. But this had dropped to about half, almost half, 4.6% at the end of the study. So that's interesting.
So with repeated exposure to that extreme content,
its thrill.
Exactly, it decreases. And you mentioned before that since the 80s, and especially with this porn and sex addiction nonsense, this has been a popular trope of theirs. This has been something that people have been used against sex for a long, long time. How many people have thought of something that they may want to try, but that's often been followed up with, I'm afraid I would like it.
Oh, God.
So that slippery slope has been a part of this sort of sexual template for as long as I can remember.
That sex is something you have to keep a tight leash on, because if you lose control, you'll be wanton.
That's exactly right.
You'll end up a sex offender.
That's exactly right.
What else we got?
Here's another interesting study to bring up to you. Now, I will say that this was actually originally done in 2018, but it hasn't really been anything that people have been talking about to any degree.
I'm intrigued.
Looking at the question of men and condom use. So I'll start with the title. This is also from the Kinsey Institute publications. how men perceive women's attractiveness. Right? We're talking obviously about heterosexual men. How men perceive women's attractiveness can affect their intention to use condoms.
It's very interesting.
There's a couple of things in here that I found really, really very interesting. In and of itself, it wasn't a surprise that we find that for heterosexual men, the more attractive they find a woman, the more they want to have sex with her. Right? I know that's a shocker. Right? But what this study was really looking at is that as these men sort of increased their rating of women's attractiveness. In other words, as they perceived women to be more attractive, their inclination to use condoms decreased dramatically. So the more attractive they found these women, the less likely they were to use condoms. And what I find most interesting about that is that these same men also went on to acknowledge that, they know that other men would want to have unprotected sex with more attractive women too. But that didn't seem to stop them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It seems an evolutionary thing.
Yeah, there's something that could be
like
in there.
Last week we were talking about sperm selection and sperm intelligence.
There's an interesting aspect of that, no doubt.
Yeah.
With just 1 minute left for this, let me just give you one last quick study. It's a little scientific, so I really just want to get more about the spirit of it. There's a new gene therapy approach that has so far been successful in eliminating over 90% of what's called latent or hard-to-treat herpes simplex virus, herpes type 1, which is mostly oral herpes. We know that half of the world population is infected with HIV type 1. And they use, HSV type 1, thank you.
Yeah.
And basically there's this genetic a technique called scissoring where they're able to go in and actually affect a part of the virus. And by combining these two scissoring techniques, they're able to not only prevent symptoms, but get rid of the virus completely, 92% of the time. It's got great implications for a lot of other things that we're dealing with right now.
Scissor me, Xerxes. For our topic this evening, I thought we'd mix it up a little bit and do something we don't do often enough. We're always excited to have guests, and we're very fortunate to be connected to some of the biggest names in the field. But, there's some expertise right here that ain't too shabby. So I thought, why don't I kind of interview you?
I will be the guest tonight.
Yes, because this topic, now all of our young viewers, don't turn away. But we're going to talk about what I mentioned before, a very, very important topic of sexuality and seniors, because society's not comfortable with it. It's another one of those groups that we tend to desexualize, like kids.
Absolutely.
Or people with disabilities. So there's this feeling that once you're past a certain age, you're not supposed to be sexual anymore. And, it's just been fascinating, like so much of both of our careers, these happy accidents that you fell into this relatively recent, so the past, 5-6 years, fairly new area of expertise for you in not just senior and sexuality. I know you've been teaching this for many years, but particularly issues like for patients in managed care settings and nursing homes and memory centers and these kind of issues. So I wanted to talk about that.
Sure. And and I think another thing that makes it really so relevant is that we are looking at an aging population. For the first time in world history, at least recorded history, the number of people over 65 outnumber the number of people under 5.
Wow.
So for the first time in the world, there's more older people than younger people. And again, there's some implications for that as we go down.
And just like we were talking a couple of weeks ago about the changing definition of adolescence, that it starts younger and lasts a lot longer.
That's right.
We also have to acknowledge the very, very different changing definition of what it means to be senior.
Absolutely.
Like, what's that line you use on hospital administrators? And
Oh, well, that's what got me started in a lot of this kind of stuff, actually,
Yeah.
where I did say to a nursing home administrator, as I was talking and I was consulting with them about setting up policies and
she
doing
was
programs
resistant
for it.
because there were old people.
Right, they were older
right?
people. And of course, I couldn't possibly know what they would be interested in. And I looked at her and I said, you know what? I think at the time, it was a couple of years ago, so I said, in 20 years, you're going to get me.
Yeah.
And you ain't ready. Right? That's what I said, you ain't ready.
I mean, even in our lifetime, right, when we were kids, old people were old people.
Right.
We went to see Grandma and Grandpa. They sat on the bench by the boardwalk.
Mm-hmm.
They walked with their cart to the supermarket. You know, they were old people. They
That's
did
right.
old people things.
That's right.
But even as our parents aged, when they retired, they followed us to Florida
Mm-hmm.
and moved into one of these 55 and over communities where it was like camp every day.
Right.
Nothing but activities. Going to pottery class, playing tennis, golfing, theater performances. And, you know, we used to kid around with them. What did you do in camp today?
Right.
Active seniors.
Right, exactly.
Right? And, you know, on occasion, they've brought one of us or both of us in for these kinds of talks.
Yeah, in their
about,
clubhouse and their programs.
That in fact, if you think about it, all the stresses of life, of you know, what most parents go through, being older and having, if you have kids or families, you know, grown up and moved on out, what better time to be able to, I mean, who has more
Sure.
time for sex and pleasure than retired people?
Exactly.
Everybody thinks, you know, you're 35, that's it, you're supposed to be at your sexual peak.
Mm-hmm.
35-year-olds are too busy paying
Right.
bills and mortgages and chasing kids and paying.
You're right.
Right?
Let me start off this here again. You said you want to talk about some myth busting and do something. Let's look at that one.
Mm-hmm.
There's a really good myth in there
Yeah.
to take a look at that most people don't even realize is a myth. So I'm actually glad you said that.
Okay.
Again, it's very easy to look at and assume that, you know, let's say you have this couple that has been together all these years, been working all their lives, now they're retired, and now all they have is time. But one thing that we often don't consider is these people have probably spent the last 40 years saying goodbye to each other in the morning and then saying hello to each other again in the evening.
That's right.
And now
Right.
they're with each other 24/7.
Or kids can be a really great distraction for 18, 20, 22 years.
Right.
And then when
That's
they
right.
leave, a lot of couples realize, oh my goodness, here
Exactly.
we are with each other. And I don't think we're that crazy about each other after
No,
all.
that was actually a project that I did as a senior when I was an undergraduate in college. Did this study. I think it was a little ahead of its time, really, in some ways, looking at learned helplessness as this sort of driver of depression in middle-aged women, and looking at that sort of key being the empty nest syndrome. Right? When all of that energy has been devoted to children, has been devoted to all these others, taking care of them, and now when they're gone, all that energy is still there,
Right.
but the object of that energy is now gone. So where does it go? How do they rechannel it? And that's where I think a lot of older adults need help.
But it also makes me think of those women that, you know, spend 20, 30 years in unsatisfying marriages and then realize, damn, I'm 60.
Right.
And I've just wasted the last 30 years. I could have been having fun.
So all of these things kind of go into
Yeah.
the mindset. Right. So, you know,
But what I think what underscores it is the societal message that you're not supposed
Right.
to be. So a lot of old folks, I
Right.
imagine, feel guilty. How often have we seen this? You know, where a senior becomes widowed and they grieve the loss of their long-term partner,
Right.
and then a year or two goes by and they want to start dating. And what do the adult kids say? Oh, mother,
You
act
can't.
your age.
Right.
Oh, you're 78 years old for crying out loud. You're not supposed to be dating.
Right.
Well, says who?
And
Why not?
And what you're also speaking to is where we still see one of the most glaringly obvious double standards. I think when we look at seniors who are now trying to date again, who are trying to get back into relationships, who are seeking that kind of, you know, eroticism and intimacy, there's a definite skew that it's a much more negative picture if it's a woman than there is for a man.
Definitely.
Right? And one of the things that we also see or don't see in any of these kinds of conversations among seniors are seniors who are not heterosexual. Gay male seniors, lesbian seniors, trans seniors. Where are these people? They are invisible.
Yeah.
And they are not talked about. They are not acknowledged.
If they need long-term care, where are they going to go?
Right.
With the hope that the staff is going to be sensitive
That's
to
exactly right.
the kind of treatment they need.
There's another assumption that if somebody is going to go into long-term care or any type of a senior living environment, that their family is also going to be the one sort of looking at in that they don't all have family. They may have disconnected with their family years ago. We see, especially in these non-heterosexual populations, long time ago, they may have sort of cut off their family of origin for their family of choice.
Right.
Which were their peers, their friends, the people that cared about them. And there's an unfortunate reality for most seniors is that as the older we get, the fewer people we have in our lives. Our friends, our family, they die off.
That culture, we've heard a lot of people say that among gay men, once they get past 50, they feel invisible.
Right.
In a social dating kind of situation.
That's absolutely right. Even
a lot of values youth.
Youth, absolutely. Right?
What is it been? Has it been 20 years since the advent of the cougar? At least the name. Right? And it showed that double standard. That, an old guy with a young woman, people said, he's got money. Isn't he lucky? Right? But an older woman with a younger guy was...
desperate.
Yeah, or people cast aspersions on both of them.
Right.
I remember when Demi Moore started dating Ashton Kutcher. The cruelty flung both their way.
That's right, absolutely. Right? Yeah. And you're right, and even the fact that we have a name like cougar, if it's an older man with a younger woman, again, just looking heterosexually, I might even say the same thing in a same-sex relationship. An older gay man with a younger gay man, there's still often going to be that financial thing that's going to be there in terms of the suspected motivation of the younger partner, but the older guy is still just a guy.
Yeah.
They have the luxury of still being men.
Right.
Women, no, there has to be some character created to try to justify having sexual urges as an older woman. Right. And then the whole degree of pathologizing of the younger man with the younger woman, very different than with the younger man and the older man.
Yeah.
Right. They're both young men. Right. But there is a different set of pathologies that are put on them. In terms of trying to explain it. So, we can't avoid, and that's another thing that drove me to do all this. We cannot avoid these issues. We do have a population that not only is aging, but is aging differently than any other population before them. Our side of the boomer generation.
Yes, aging boomers who have grown up with certain attitudes and values and beliefs about sex that are not likely to change just because they're in their 50s and 60s now.
That's exactly right.
Absolutely. The staff at these facilities tends to infantilize them, though.
Oh, yes.
And that's
absolutely.
where we run into trouble.
Right. Just like adult children.
Mr. Smith won't stay out of Mrs. Jones' room. What are we going to do?
That was one of the first calls I got in probably 1990 or 1989. Right? And that was exactly what it is. We need you to come and do a program. We have a problem. And I'm, what? What is a problem? It sounded really serious. And they said, we can't keep them out of each other's rooms.
Let's take a break and talk about that.
I'm Rachel Needle, co-director of Modern Sex Therapy Institutes. And Modern Sex Therapy Institutes is a continuing education provider. We provide continuing education for medical and mental health professionals around the world. And we have over 140 archived workshops on our website, so please check them out at www.modernsextherapyinstitutes.com. Also, we have a number of certification programs, including sex therapy, couples and sex therapy, LGBTQIA affirmative therapy, alternative relationships, transgender mental health care, medical sexology, sex education, and sex counselor certifications. In addition, we offer a PhD in clinical sexology. So please, again, go to our website, check out everything that we have to offer. A lot of our stuff is available solely online from the convenience of your own home or office. We do things live in 8 states and live via webinar as well.
So what would your advice be to the staff at, say, a senior living facility?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of issues that I do like to impress upon them. Number one, they've been sexual a lot longer than they've been old. Right? That's something that people have to really understand.
I never heard that.
They have been sexual a lot longer than they've been old. We got to get out of their way. Right. These are not children. Just like I said to that person that called me in a panic, we can't keep them out of each other's rooms. My first question was, why are you trying to? Yes. These are not children at summer camp that you're trying to manage and wrangle.
Right.
I think there's
although there are panty raids.
Sure. Oh yeah, absolutely. I think staff really needs to understand the difference between being responsible for and responsible to. Right? Knowing the difference between being protective and paternalistic.
Right.
Right? So that sometimes, we have to remind staff.
Yeah, how about some privacy and dignity once in a while?
And that's a big part of it, because staff, and this is sort of across the board, I would say most staff in most places kind of act this way anyway. Yeah. It's less about what's best for the people that they're taking care of than it is what's easier for them to take care of. Mm-hmm. So it's not what's their quality of life, and that's the issue that I always want them to be redirected toward. This is about a quality of life issue for these seniors. It's not about what makes the staff's job easier, and that seems to be more of a guiding principle. So to that end, like you just said, acknowledging that they are sexual people, giving them privacy, letting people know that there are cameras in public areas, but here are private areas. Doing things like knocking on a door and waiting to be invited in. This tendency of staff to just barge in. And I do like to remind them that you come here every day, this is your job. Mm-hmm. But this is their home. And they need to treat it a little bit more like their home. Yeah. Right? So things like privacy, things like respect. We should be encouraging intimacy and affection and relationships among seniors, not trying to weed them out. And I think a lot of the fear and a lot of the harm that's caused seniors from these staff members comes from this idea of consent. And I think when we really see among seniors in general, but especially when there's cognitive issues, when there's dementia.
People immediately go right to, can't give consent, it's illegal, it's abusive, it's a crime, we have to report.
And they're just wrong, right? And it's such a deprivation of quality of life for seniors.
So I want to be clear, what you're saying is that someone with Alzheimer's or dementia who might not know their partner's name can still consent to sexual relations.
Exactly. There's two things that we have to look at. One's a legal term, the other's a clinical term. The legal term is competence. Mm-hmm. Competency is determined by a judge in a court of law. That is a judicial order. Right. But capacity is a clinical judgment that is made per decision. It is a decision-specific judgment, and it's not made legally. It is made by clinical staff. It is made by whoever is really there in charge of the situation. And what we have to really look at there, especially in wanting to preserve quality of life, is not whether or not we have the same standard of consent that we do for young people. We talk a lot about enthusiastic consent among young people, but that cannot be the standard among seniors, especially when there is some kind of cognitive issue. There we have to look at, do they know what they're doing, right? Mm-hmm. And in legal terms, it's having an appropriate appreciation for what they're doing, which is just really understanding that they are doing it, especially given that second factor of, do they know that they can consent or assent?
Assent.
Right. So they have to not only know that they can, say yes to what they're doing, but they have the ability to say no. Right? That they can refuse what they're doing, which they often have. And as long as those two things are there, my big question is, do details matter? If they don't know where they are, if they can't tell you their name, if they can't tell you the name of the person that they're doing this with, does that really matter? if they know what it is they're doing and they have the full capacity to consent or assent. And my case is that is sufficient.
And that sounds healthier than, drunken college students who might not know where they are
Right.
or who the person's name is they're with.
That's right.
And consent
Exactly.
is a much foggier issue there.
You're right.
Even with dementia,
That's
which
right.
is kind of funny.
It's crazy. But again, we have to make different kinds of judgments and evaluations. Not looking, like I said, not looking at consent in the same way, but we need to look at, is it exploitive?
Mm-hmm.
Is it abusive? Right? Those are important questions.
Right.
Right? And again, consent and assent, awareness of what they're doing. That's really all you need.
Yeah.
Right?
Unfortunately, I think the reality is far more abuse and sexual assaults happen at the hands of staff than other residents.
That's an important point. Can it happen at the hands of residents? Yes, and usually those rare occasions where there is actually a problem, usually some kind of temporal lobe damage with the resident themselves, that hypersexuality, which, by the way, is very, very rare among seniors and very rare among dementia patients. Right? Well,
Some
uncommon.
Parkinson's patients, right?
It's like less than 7%, right? So when you think about acting out, no, they don't really do that as often as people would say. Another one of these tropes to just justify the marginalizing older people.
Right.
They are sexual people. The majority of seniors. And there have been studies, I can cite you a study from 2007, from 2009, 2015, 2018, Australia, New Zealand, one of the largest English longitudinal studies ever, US longitudinal studies. Every study that's ever been done on this topic is pretty clear that older adults are still interested, and the majority of them are still active sexually.
Right.
Maybe
not the same way as
not in the
20s.
same way, but the two biggest issues are basically physical ability and availability of a partner.
Right.
When we look at the majority of older adults and seniors who are not sexually active, you find more often than not the reason is they don't have a partner. Not that they don't want a partner.
Right.
But they don't have a partner. So we have to do a much, much better job in how we just look at senior citizens. Right? And again, we have a vested interest in this because we're knocking on the door, of that.
Yes.
So, want to make sure that, the world we're coming into, and like I have said to these administrators before, they're not ready.
Yeah.
Right? And that's a lot of the work that I've been doing is sort of setting the stage for myself, I guess.
Yeah.
It comes down to it, a selfish notion. I want to make sure that if
Plan on being the frisky Randy one at the nursing home.
Hey, at the very least, I can't imagine now in 15 or 20 years I'm not going to be interested in the things that I'm interested in now.
Yeah.
Maybe not to the same degree, but still going to be there.
It's just it's again part of the bigger theme. Human beings are sexual beings. Right. So there's no opting out. There's no, doesn't matter if you're in a relationship or not, or, everyone from a celibate priest, assuming they maintain their celibacy, we'll save that for another show, to a sex worker. One is no more or less a sexual being than the other. They just make different decisions about how they express their sexuality.
And that's exactly it.
It's not just, we're sexual beings from puberty until age 60. And then, kids are sexual beings. And we're sexual beings until we drop dead.
Well, we're sexual beings even before we're born.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then it doesn't end until we're dead.
There is, quote, sexual activity in terms of genital awareness, and erections, and responses like that, even before we're born.
Yeah.
So go fight that.
Exactly.
Antis. Right? That seems like a good place to wind it down.
Yeah.
Thanks for indulging me.
My pleasure. Thank you.
It's always a good topic, and we want to hit all of our audience and make sure everybody understands that this is universal.
That's right. And if you're young now, you're gonna be old.
Yeah. And if you're in a relationship now that's based strictly on that hot, lusty physical attraction, that can't last.
You'll find out.
Yeah. So we thank you again for joining us and sharing this time with us, and we will say goodnight and invite you back next Friday and every Friday at 7 o'clock on the East Coast for more of Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers.
Stay well.
Thanks for watching Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. Join us each week on Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern. You can also follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay on top of the latest developments in the ever-changing world of sex and sexuality.